All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to, it's hard to believe that it is our pre-Pesach shir in Meretz Hashem, but a tremendous zuchos, Baruch Hashem, to be able to prepare for the upcoming Yom Tiv with a little bit of inspiration. We all know what we have to do mechanistically, and we all know what we have to do detail-wise in order to prepare ourselves for Yom Tiv. So hopefully tonight we'll use this as an opportunity in Meretz Hashem to be able to prepare spiritually. First of all, ladies, feel free, anything that's on the tables, you could push totally out of your way. You can move it to somewhere where it's not in your way at all. Make yourself comfortable. Okay, so begin tonight, first of all, by thanking all of our sponsors for tonight's shir. To thank our annual Talmud Torah sponsor, the Tilson family of Eretz Yisrael, for dedicating all the Sherman Drushos this year as a zechus for Besoros Tovos Am Yisrael. Our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Nisan, Haba Aleinu L'Tova, Paul Palik, in celebration of the Nisan birthdays of his wife Kathy, granddaughter Tikva Esther, an anonymous sponsorship in the schus of Simchas for all of our children, and for Nisan to be the month of Geula Shalema for all of Klal Yisrael. And Avram and Sheni Kalman of Eretz Yisrael for dedicating the Shiurim this month in memory of Avram's mother, Sarah Braina Bas Yoshua Heschel Zechron Livracha. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the Neshama Sab and Aliyah, the families in Nechama, all of those who need a refuah should have them together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu Meretz Hashem bring all of our hostages home b'shalom and b'karov, and may our holy soldiers be successful b'chol ma'aseh yedeihem. So there's always the question about what to focus on in a pre-Pesach shir. So of course, again, we could focus on the details, what to clean, how to clean, where to clean, what not to clean, what you have to do, what you don't have to do, how to make sure that Pesach cleaning does not become spring cleaning, unless you want it to be, or how to make sure that somehow Pesach is not a word that engenders a sense of dread and awe and fear inside of you. So much of the beauty of Pesach has been lost because the truth is we become a little overzealous in some of the preparations, recognizing that what halacha demands of us often may be different than what we demand of ourselves. But assuming by now everyone is pretty well versed in that particular topic. So instead, I wanted to focus a little bit in terms of a spiritual theme that we could take with us as we go into this Yom Tov of Pesach. And there are many different themes. The overarching theme of Pesach, really it's looked at as the overarching theme of the seder. But it's really the overarching theme of Pesach is espoused in the Gemara in Arvei Pesachim. In the last chapter of Pesachim, the Mishnah says, Chayiv Adam liros es atzmo ki ilu hu yatsa mitzrayim. A person is obligated to see themselves as if they left Egypt. That's the mandate. In other words, on a very simple level, how do you know if you've had a successful seder? How do you know? Right? What's the metric for a successful seder? What would you say? Metric for a successful seder?
25 years later.
I'm sorry?
25 years later, how are your kids doing?
Beautiful. Or seder as a vehicle for chinuch. Beautiful. Fulfilling the mitzvahs. Right? What else? For some people, it's staying awake. Right? For other people, if you have extended family, it's without drama. There's like a lot of different metrics for a successful seder. But Chazal gave us a very simple idea. How do you know if you had a successful seder? If by the end of it, you feel like you have left Egypt. If somehow you experience that emancipatory process, which essentially means if you emerge from the Seder a different person than you entered, that's a successful Seder, which is a really overwhelming thing, because I think many of us know that one of the great challenges in our Yiddishkeit in general is that it is so easy to become proficient in the mechanistic details, but feel spiritually unfulfilled. A lot of us contend with this day in and day out. I know exactly what to do, I know how to do it, and I'm going to keep doing it. But to be honest, the feeling is not necessarily there. And especially, I was talking with my wife the other night, I think this year offers us a very unique opportunity also, being that I know it's a 3-day Yom Tov, but it will be nice to go into the Seder from Shabbos. Right? It'll be a different Seder. I mean, it's an opportunity to go in hopefully a little bit more relaxed, maybe not much more, but a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more perhaps in the right headspace. But that's our avodah. That's what Chazal say. Chayiv Adam liros es asmo kili yatzim mitzrayim. The obligation is to see myself as if I left Egypt, to undergo my own personalistic emancipation. So what does that mean? What does that mean? How do we do it? How do we accomplish it? How do you measure if you're successful or not? So I want to draw your attention to a part of the Haggadah, which, I don't know, every year I say I'm going to focus on something different, and every year I focus on the same thing. Because there's a part of the Haggadah that seems to me like so profoundly, on one hand, it's troubling, inspiring, difficult to understand, but yet so profoundly relatable, and that's the Arba Banim, the 4 sons. the four sons. At our seder, my mother always says this. Part of the seder is another piece also. There should be sheets, by the way, if anyone. Good? By the Axel. So one of the beautiful things, I often tell people this, by the seder, it's so important to remember, you don't have to come up with new divrei Torah. Sometimes the most beautiful thing about the seder is saying the same things year in and year out. There's a beauty to it. So, my mother used to say Dvar Torah, now my wife says, Mamish, the same, I don't know who started first, if it was my mother or my wife, say by Rabbi Sachs, Zichron Livracha, that the Arba Banim, the four sons, don't have to be four different people, but the four sons are often just the four different pieces that each of us have within ourselves. We're all the Arba Banim. That's why I think so much of the Seder, we're drawn to this idea of these four sons. Because at times, we see different sons come out from ourselves, and other times I see myself as a composite of all of the sons. But yet the son that's most troubling, right? The son that is most difficult to wrap our head around, of course, is the Rasha. So take a look at source number 1. So again, the Haggadah says Rasha. That's the middle section of it. Rasha Ma'u Omer. What did the Rasha say? What does the Rasha say? Maha avoda zos lachem. What are you doing? What are you doing? What is all this avodah? What is all this work? And again, the Haggadah comments, lachem v'lo lo. He talks about it as, what are you doing? In other words, he's not involved. He's not involved. What is all this stuff that you're doing? And then Haggadah says, kafar be'ikar. And because he removed himself from the collective, therefore again, he's an agnostic. He doesn't believe in God. Kafar be'ikar. And therefore, what do we do with him? So literal translation means to blunt his teeth. We'll see exactly, it's often says hit him in the mouth. It can't be the translation, because we're not hitting anyone in their mouth. That's not the proper approach to anything in life. So again, blunt his teeth. We'll see a better interpretation in just a little bit. Ve'emar lo, and say to him, Ba'avur ze asa Hashem li b'tzeisim mitzrayim. Because of this, God did for me when He took me out of Egypt. Leave lo lo. We say to the Rasha, God took me out and not you. Because ilu hayasham lo hayanigal. Because Rasha, if you were there, you would have never been redeemed. Great. What's the problem with this conversation? Right? This seems to be the most counterproductive conversation recorded in the history of the Jewish people. Right? I'll give you just a simple example. If you know that someone's doing something wrong, right? If you know someone's doing something wrong, maybe it's a friend, perhaps it's a spouse, right? And you need to tell them what they're doing something wrong. What's the way not to tell someone they're doing something wrong? You're doing something wrong. The worst thing you could do when someone is doing something wrong is beat them up about it. For the simple reason, no one ever gets beaten down and says, wow, you know what? Thank you so much for that. That was so good. Now that I feel like a piece of garbage, like a shmata, now I really feel energized and ready to make more of myself. Rather, usually what ends up happening is when you beat people down, they stay down. That's what happens. We all know this. Every parent knows this. Every spouse knows this. Every friend or everyone should know this. That there are times like you have to have a difficult conversation with someone, but it's always with love and it's always with encouragement. And the encouragement could be even tinged with some disappointment. But sometimes you could give disappointed encouragement. And if that sounds like an oxymoron, Aaron HaKohen did this all the time, right? Aaron HaKohen would build people up, and by building people up, people would realize on their own, Aaron thinks so much of me. How could I behave in this way? That's disappointed encouragement. And you look at this conversation, and it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. On one hand, it doesn't make any sense because, hey, at least the Rasha's engaging, right? The Rasha's asking. He could also not be doing anything. He could also not show up to the Seder at all. He doesn't have to participate at all. Yet, amazingly enough, he's asking. The fact that he's asking tells you what? There's something. I don't know what it means. Is he interested? Is he provoking? What is he stirring the pot? Is he agitating? I don't know. But one thing is clear is he cares enough to ask. So therefore, again, if he's engaging, he's opening the door to us, it doesn't make sense that we would slap him down so incredibly hard. So what's happening over here? What is this exchange? And ultimately, again, by extension, what is it that we are supposed to learn from the Haggadah? So if you look in source number 1, I copied for you over here a piece from a Haggadah called the Dvar Aaron. The Dvar Aaron was written by the Rav of Chop. Chop was a city in Hungary. He was a Rav in Hungary before the war. And it's incredible, actually. He wrote a handwritten manuscript. And what he handwrote the Haggadah, and then he wrote 5 commentaries on the Haggadah. He himself wrote commentary on the commentary, 5 different commentaries on it. I picked this Haggadah up a couple of years ago. Absolutely incredible. See, he writes over here on the right-hand side, called Dvar Aaron. He says like this, if you look right where it says Rosh Ha'ma'u Omer, on the right-hand side where it says Dvar Aaron. Hine Rosh Hazeh, hu kofer be'ikr, ha'torah u'b'schar va'onesh, v'zeh she'amar meha'avoda zos lachem, rotza lomar, ma to'eles yesh lachem mizeh, ki Rosha ikr avodasa b'tayvas gashmius u'be'inyanei ha'olam hazeh. So Dvar Aaron understands that who is this person? Right? Who is this Rasha? This Rasha is a person who places absolutely no primacy on spirituality. Everything is about the physical. He is a hedonistic individual who has one pursuit in life, and that is pursuit of physical and material pleasure. And that's why he looks at spirituality with disdain. He looks at spirituality and he talks about spirituality in a dismissive way. So what do we say to him? Lachem v'lo ashmoinan b'zeh derasha zeh nitbas b'diburo v'nokei shimrei piv ki gala atzlo sherashahu v'zeh she'amar. So again, if you skip down a little bit, skip down to va'af ata perush gam ato tzia min haklal k'mo shehu haki hashina perush taknitenu b'dvarim. So the Dvar Aaron literally goes with the idea that who is this person? This is a person who is a danger. This is a person who's a danger. This is a person who is trying to sway other individuals from a spiritual life, kind of mocking. You know, it's interesting. The Gemara says that there are different groups of people who are not mekabel pnei hashchina. They don't have olam haba, right? So if I were to ask you, name some people, some groups you think don't have olam haba. I don't know, who do you think? Who doesn't have olam haba? I'm sorry. Good, mevaish barabim, right? Because embarrassing someone, like killing them. You know who's the first on the list? People who have olam haba? Kat leitzim. A letz, a mocker, a scoffer. What's a letz? A letz is someone who takes nothing seriously. Everything is a joke. Everything is a joke. And even when things are serious, that person just finds a way to make a mockery of whatever it is. So the Gemara says, a letz doesn't have a chid, because what does a let's do? Right? We've all encountered this type of behavior, and at first it's cute, right? And then it's annoying, and then it's actively upsetting, because you want to shake the person and say, don't you take anything seriously in life? Like, humor is a fantastic and profound tool, but at certain points in life you have to be serious. So the Dvar Aaron almost understands that the Rasha is like this let's. He's this person who totally actively diminishes the importance of anything spiritual at every twist and turn. Whenever given the opportunity, he'll mock. Whenever given the opportunity, he'll disparage. Whenever given the opportunity, he will derail. That's what he does. That's what he does. And so the Dvar Aaron understands that with such an individual, you have to deal with him harshly. You have to deal with him harshly, and that's why he says Hake Eshinav doesn't mean hit. Remember again, if Hake Eshinav meant hit him in the mouth, how would it have been spelled? How would it have been spelled? You're a resident Hebraist here. If Hake Eshinav, how would you spell it?
Hit him in his teeth.
No, I'm saying, how would you spell it? Hebrew. How would you spell it? Hey chaf, right? Hey chaf, right? Not a kuf, right? So it's hey chaf hey. Right? It's hey chaf hey. Hake Eshinav with a kuf doesn't mean to hit. So that's why again he says hake means almost taknitenu. Give it back to him. Give it back to him. Whatever he's dishing out, give it back to him. So, which is fascinating. So according to Dvar Aaron, like what's the message over here? Like what exactly are we supposed to take from this? So I think what the Dvar Aaron is trying to sensitize us to is, there is room for everyone, as long as the dialogue is respectful. But if the dialogue is not going to be respectful, if the dialogue is going to be mocking, if the dialogue is going to be undermining, if the dialogue is going to take away from the potential spiritual experience of everyone else, perhaps that has to be dealt with. Because where there's leitzanos, where there's mockery, where there's spiritual disparagement, that's like a cancer. And you can't just let that fester. It has to be dealt with. Now, the way that Dvar Aaron says to deal with it is to give it back. Just so you understand. Russia, just so you understand. We love you. Stay at the table. Don't go anywhere. But just so you understand, that's the kind of behavior. You see, it's important for us to understand how many Jews left Egypt. How many Jews? Remember, 1/5 of the Jewish people left Egypt, 4/5 died during Choshech. 4/5. Do you know why 4/5 died during Choshech? Because they were Rishayim. It's not because they were committing Averos or doing other things. They just could not get themselves to commit because the cynicism, the mockery, just kept them from becoming serious people. So the Dvar Aaron says, there's room for everyone at the table, but there has to be a sense of mutual respect. And if there's no mutual respect, then there's no real dialogue to have. And that's why he said to the Rasha, Haki Eshinov, you can't dialogue with dignity, you can't dialogue with derech eretz. I'm sorry, I guess the conversation is over. There's nothing more for us to discuss. You know, one of the most beautiful things in Yiddishkeit is you don't have to agree with anyone else. You don't, right? We are a people that prize ourselves on debate and different ideas and different approaches. But the one thing we pride ourselves on is a dialogue or a debate with dignity. The pages of the Gemara are filled with disputes, many of them unresolved. And the Gemara is an entire exercise about how to disagree agreeably. The Rasha is an example of where if there's no respect, then there's no dialogue to be had. Okay, so that's the Dvaran, that's the first approach. And I would say that's probably a more classic approach amongst the commentaries of the Haggadah. Rav Avram Yitzchak Cohen Cook has different approaches. It's actually quoted in source number 2. Rav Shlomo Aviner has a beautiful Haggadah. And in his, he quotes a lot of the Perushim of Rav Kook. And he quotes over here as follows. He says, Kafar be'ikar. Lichora harasha lo kafar be'ikar. Now, here's what's interesting. The word or the phrase kafar be'ikar is a very strong statement. That means you don't believe in God. Now, the truth is, Rav Aviner says, I don't understand. Where do we see that the Rasha doesn't believe in God? Right? All we see is the Rasha is just wondering, what is all this stuff? Right? What are we doing over here? What's happening over here? So what do you mean kafar be'ikar? So this is incredible. He says, Kfira be'ikar hi, kfira b'mitzvahs Hashem. Skip down a little bit. Elamazbir Maran Rav Kook. So he's quoting over of Avram Yitzchak Cohen Kook, the first chief rabbi. This was before the establishment of the state of Israel. So the first chief rabbi over British Mandate Palestine. So Rav Kook says as follows. This is incredible. Ki otza es atzmo mikidushas klal Yisrael hari ose es akfira be'ikar. Rav Kook says, you know what the problem with the Rasha is? The problem with the Rasha is at the end of the day, he removes himself from klal Yisrael. It's interesting that we don't care. You could ask questions, and you could even wonder to yourself, no, I think all of us have had that moment in our Judaism where we ask ourselves this question, does God really need me to do this? And often it occurs very, very often during Pesach time, right? Does God really need me to do this? And by the way, that is a legitimate question. You could ask it. You can ask. That's not a lack of frumkeit. It's not. You can ask whatever questions you want. That's not the problem with the Rasha. The problem with the Rasha is that he's removing himself from the collective. The Rasha is standing alone on the island. He's removing himself from the totality of Klal Yisrael. Ki kedushas ha'emunah shel Torah v'amitzvah kshura v'kayemes ba'achizasa b'Klal Yisrael. This is very Rav Kookian, right? Rav Kook understood the entire Kedusha of a Jew emanates from the fact that you are part of a collective, that you're part of something bigger than yourself, that you're part of the Am. And by the way, who's Am Yisrael? Who's Am Yisrael? Am Yisrael are not just the people who live on your block, right? And Am Yisrael are not just people who live in your shul, daven in your shul. And not just people who look like you, dress like you, practice like you, talk like you, send you their kids to the same schools that you send your kids to, right? Do the same things that you do. That's not, that's a part of Am Yisrael. Am Yisrael is all of Am Yisrael. Am Yisrael is every Jew of every type. Am Yisrael is every Jew of every affiliation. That's Am Yisrael. And in order to have your personalistic holiness of being a Jew, you must be embedded in the Klal. You must pledge your allegiance to the collective of Klal Yisrael. And if you remove yourself, then you divest yourself of your Kedusha. This is why, again, this was the Noam Elimelech said that, it was Yartzeit, just the other week. Noam Elimelech said that every single day a person has to begin, Hinei muchadum mezumah l'kabel al atzmi, mitzvahs aseh, shel v'yahavta l're'acha kamocha. It's written on the kever of the Arizal as well, Rav Shlomo Alkabetz, or one of the two, maybe both. Right? How does a Yid begin the morning? I am hereby ready to accept upon myself mitzvahs aseh v'havtecha kamocha, to love every Jew like I love myself. In other words, that's the first thing you do after moda'ani. So you say moda'ani, and then again, okay, negel vaser, and then the first thing a Jew does in the morning is I accept upon myself to love every single Jew. There is no strength that we possess as individuals. The strength we possess, well, I take that back. We have strength as individuals when we are individuals embedded in the collective. And therefore, says Rav Kook, you know what the problem with the Rasha is? He's hotzi as atzma min haklal. He doesn't view himself as a member of Klal Yisrael. He doesn't view himself as a member of the collective. And this is one of the most overwhelming and incredible things. Pesach, you know what's incredible about Pesach? Pesach is a story about the creation of a nation. Pesach is not a personal story. Pesach is a national story. Pesach is the Yom Tov that concretized and created our identity as a people. So by definition, Achdus and the ability to be part of a people is core to this Yom Tov. So the Rosh who says, what are you guys doing? What are you people doing? And he's excluding himself from that collective. Rav Kook says, if you're excluded from the collective, you divest yourself of your personalistic Kedusha. And if you divest yourself of your personalistic holiness, there's no longer really a conversation to be had. So incredible. So you have the Dvar Aaron, which I think is the more common opinion, that really the Rasha is just someone who's just disparaging. He's the let's. He just doesn't want to believe anything. But let's be clear. Everyone has a right to decide what they want to believe in and not believe in. We all have that personal choice. But you have to be respectful of other people's choices as well. Dvar Aaron, the Rasha's problem is a lack of respect. A lack of respect. Rav Kook, the Rasha's problem is a lack of achdus. He doesn't feel connected to the klal. And how can you go ahead and how can you have a Pesach without being connected to klal? Now, by the way, I want to point out that these are themes, by the way. Although we're learning them over here by the Rasha, the most incredible thing about the seder is you'll see these themes throughout the entire seder. The notion of respect for the other, the notion of dialogue with respect, this idea of being part of the klal. Just to give you like another example of this, in Halach Ma'anya, which again, so remember, just in the course of the seder, so you've had Kadesh, Kiddush, Orchatz, washing, Karpas, so whatever you eat, potato, celery, right? Yachatz, breaking of the middle matzah, right? And then we go into halach ma'anya. After we break the middle matzah, so again we put the larger part away for afikomen, and we use the smaller part for magid, halach ma'anya. And what do we say in the middle of halach ma'anya? What do we say? Kol dichvin yesei v'yechol, kol ditzrich yesei v'yifsach. Whoever is hungry, come and eat. Whoever needs a place for the seder, come and join us. What's the problem? It's too late, right? In other words, right, first of all, who are you talking to? Right? Who are you talking to? The people at your table. So presumably they're invited, right? They're sitting at your table already. Furthermore, you're already into the seder. So what's going on with this invitation over here, literally once I've started the seder? So what's the pshat? And Rabbi Soloveitchik says so beautifully. He says, Rabbi Soloveitchik writes this, Rabbi Nachman writes this. This is a common theme. It's not an invitation. It's not an invitation. It's about that. What it means to be a free person means the ability to be a collective. A slave is only focused on one thing, and that's what? Survival. There was a famous survivor, Viktor Frankl. And Viktor Frankl wrote an incredible book called Man's Search for Meaning, and in it he writes something incredibly profound. He writes about his liberation from Auschwitz, and he writes that the Nazis left the camp. And like the prisoners, even though they were free, they had no idea what to do with themselves. So they found a storage area with clothing. They went in there, they put on clothing. They got into the commissary, the kitchen. They found a loaf of bread, 2 loaves of bread. So they sat down in some empty area. They made a fire. They're sitting around, shell shocked. No one has any. They're not talking, nothing. He says, suddenly the most amazing thing happened. He said, someone took a loaf of bread, took off a piece, and passed it to his neighbor. And the next person took a piece and passed it to his neighbor. And Frankl writes, he says, the law in the lager, the law in the concentration camp was, eat your bread and your friends too, if you can. Survive. Survive at any cost. And he says, in that moment, when we shared with each other, that was the moment that I recognized that we were free. Freedom means the ability to live beyond yourself. Freedom means that I am part of the most incredible nation on the face of the world. And freedom means that I have the ability to contribute, not just to me, and not just to my nuclear family, but to my people in some way as well. And what it means to be a Jew, and what it means to be a free Jew, what it means to have Pesach, is I am a Klal Yisrael Yid. I am not a person who lives for myself. I'm not a person who lives by myself. I am a person who lives for my nation. I am a person who lives for the Klal, and again, the Klal means everyone. The Klal means everyone. So Rav Kook says, when the Rasha comes along and the Rasha says, what are you people doing? And he's clearly extricating himself or removing himself from that collective, then there's no Pesach for you. Then the truth is, there's no Yiddishkeit for you. Because what is Yiddishkeit without the Klal? What is a Jew without his or her nation? We're nothing without each other. We're nothing without the collective. When the Rasha removes himself, he's just totally lost. Okay, so we have a Dvar Aaron so far. Rav Kook. I want to show you something incredible. Take a look at number 3. We're going to go on a little bit of a detour over here. So if you take a look at number 3, this is from Parshas Mishpatim. This is in Parshas Mishpatim. Okay, so just to give you a little bit of context over here, the halacha is a Jew could own a servant. There are different types of servants. There could be a Jewish servant, an Eved Ivri, and a non-Jewish servant, an Eved Kanani. So the Torah says as follows. Take a look. This is talking about an Eved Kanani, a non-Jewish servant. Ish es ein avdo, o es ein amaso v'shichasa l'chavshi yishachenu tachas eino. So the halacha is, if you knock out, the master knocks out his slave's tooth or his slave's eye, then the halacha is the slave goes free. That's the halacha. Okay, the Gemara in source number 4, Maseches Kiddushin, clarifies this a little bit. He says something amazing. He says, Tana, Yotze b'shein v'ayin v'rashay v'arim shein achozim. So by the way, it's the eye, it's the tooth, shein is the tooth, it's the eye, and other body parts that don't regenerate. So if the master injures his slave in such a way that it's irreversible, non-regenerative damage, the slave goes free. Okay, so the Gemara says, Bishlam Hashem Vayin Ksivis. The Gemara says, essentially, the Gemara asks as follows. I'm going to spare you all the details. We'll just get to the bottom line. The Gemara says, why do you have to write eye and tooth? Just write one of them. And I would understand if you knock out a part of the body or you damage a part of the body of the slave goes free. It's a penalty to the master. Again, just to understand, I should explain. This halacha was legislated by HaKadosh Baruch Hu to ensure that a Jewish person, a Jewish master, doesn't mistreat his servant. If you mistreat your servant, he goes free. That's the halacha. So the Gemara essentially says, why do you have to talk about knocking out a tooth and an eye? Just say one of them, and that would have been good enough. So he says, or something. Gemara says something amazing. Gemara says, I'll tell you why. Tzricha. I'm in source number 4, the end of the first line. Di'i kasev rachmana shein hava aminu afilu shein dechalav. This is interesting. If it would have said tooth, I would have even thought shein dechalav. You know what shein dechalav is? A baby tooth, right? A baby tooth. I would even thought if you knock out the baby tooth of an Eved. Not true. It's not a baby tooth. There's our kasev rachmana ayin. Therefore, the Torah writes eye. Torah writes eye, right? Because again, eye obviously doesn't regenerate. The baby tooth will. The kasev rachmana ayin, had the Torah said ayin, I would have thought hava amina ma ayin shenivra imo af kol shenivra imo. Just like a person is born with an eye, so to a master only has to emancipate his servant if he knocks out or if he injures a part of the body with which the servant is born. But if it's a part of the body that the servant's not born with and the master injures it, the slave doesn't go free. What would be a good example of that? A tooth. Tooth, right? The servant's not born with a tooth. So if it would have just said eye, I would have thought since eye is something you're born with. So that's something that if the master injures it, the slave goes free. But something like a tooth where the servant is not born with it, if the master injures it, perhaps the slave does not go free. Therefore, the Torah writes shein, tooth as well, to teach us that even though the slave is not born with a tooth, if the master knocks it out, ultimately, again, the slave goes free. So the Sfas Emes, the Ger Rebbe, says something absolutely amazing. The Ger Rebbe says, now we understand the Rasha. Right? So the Rasha comes rolling in, right, with his whole list of theological issues and questions. And yes, it's true, he's disrespectful, and he's disparaging, and he's not a mensch, and he's hedonistic, like the Dvar Aaron said. And yes, like Rav Kook said, he removes himself from the klal, from the collective. But the Sfas Emes says something amazing. Hake eshinov. Hake eshinov. The shane, the tooth, is not something you're born with. The tooth is something that is formed later on in life. The Sasema says, when you look at the Rasha, don't simply see him for what he is in front of you right now. Whatever's going on, something's happening with him. Jews are good, and Jews are beautiful, and Jews are respectful, and Jews love each other. And when you see this Rasha acting in this way, that's not the real him. There's something else that's churning inside of him. There's something else that's going on over here. There's some other complicating factor. So what do we do with the Rasha? What is that going to say? What do we do with him? Hake Shinov. Knock out his teeth, which of course is not literally knock out his teeth, but the tooth represents something that grew upon the person later on in life. The Rasha wasn't born this way. The Rasha was born righteous, was born holy. Something happened in life that caused him to sprout this tooth of rishus, of negativity, of disparagement, of lack of national cohesion. So what do? What's our avodah during the seder? Knock out the tooth. Knock out the tooth. Try to see beneath the veneer and try to understand who this person really is. Such a dramatically different approach by the Sfas Emes. Sasi, as opposed to Dvar Aaron and even Rav Kook, who understand that the guy's really Hirasha. He's really Hirasha, disparaging, removed himself from the klal. The Sfas Emes understands beneath every single tooth of negativity is a holy and beautiful Jew who is yearning to come out. Beneath that facade of maha avoda zos lachem, the disrespect, the hedonistic material life, the person who wants nothing to do with the collective, that's just the tooth. That's just the tooth. That's just a negative facade. But if you knock out the tooth, you will find the spiritual beauty that is behind there. Watch this. Rabbi Nachman says something absolutely amazing. Rabbi Nachman says in number 5, this is incredible. Rabbi Nachman writes, a little bit of a different approach, but he says, V'zeu af ata hakeshinav. Get ready for this. By the way, how many teeth does a person have? A dentist here tonight. How many teeth? 32 teeth. 32 teeth. The Rebbe says, Ki halev shinayim him kineged halev nisivos hachachma. The Rebbe says, shinayim, 32 shinayim is the same gematria as lev, as heart. Sometimes you have to knock out the teeth in order to get to the lev. Sometimes you have to kind of pierce the veneer. You have to pierce the facade. You have to recognize that in life in general, there are two different ways you could view people. You could view people as inherently bad, backstabbing, treacherous, right? That's how you could view them. Or you could view people as inherently good. But even if you view people as inherently good, they're always going to make significant and probably hurtful mistakes, right? Just because someone's good doesn't mean they're not going to do bad things. And Rabbi Nachman says something so incredibly beautiful. The Rebbe says, every person is so holy, and every person is so good. But as we go through the journey of life, what ends up happening is we start growing teeth, right? We start growing teeth. Right? I sprouted this tooth because someone stabbed me in the back, and that made me a little bit more of a cynical, jaded person. And I grew this tooth because this circumstance in life didn't exactly pan out the way that I happened. And then I grew this tooth of negativity because of this failed relationship. And then I was let down by this and let down by that. And meanwhile, before I know it, I have rows and rows of teeth, right? All of these shinayim, all of these layers of negativity. And after a while, right, if you don't extract those teeth, they create a hardened surface upon my soul. So the Rasha comes to the table and says as Sfas Emes, when you look at the Rasha, what you need to see is a beautiful and holy Jew who is trapped inside of that Rasha. This person's not a Rasha. He's just a Jew who is theologically challenged. He's just a Jew with a lot of shinayim, like a lot of teeth of negativity. But if you can figure out how to knock out, and he wasn't born that way, right? Same way we're not born with teeth. He wasn't born with this negativity. You just have to find a way to help him remove it. And if you can knock out those teeth, then says the Sfas Emes, you'll find his goodness. If you can knock out his teeth, then what says Rabbi Nachman? You'll find his lev. You'll find his heart. You know, we see this theme. One of my favorite ideas. The pasuk says that Vayehav Yitzchak es Esav kitzayid befiv. Yitzchak loved Esav, literally translated. Now we normally don't translate kitzayid befiv because literally he gave him, the way Rashi translates it is, because Esav gave Yitzchak meat. He hunted for him and he gave him meat. So which is interesting, that's why Yitzchak loves Esav, because he feeds him, he gives him food, so suddenly he's his favorite son. And I believe Yitzchak says something so incredibly beautiful. The Rebbe says like this: you have to put the punctuation in a different place. Vayehav Yitzchak es Esav kitzayid. Yitzchak loved Esav because he saw that Esav was a tormented soul who had beautiful holiness trapped within him. But the holiness was buried underneath so many layers of impurity and so many layers of negativity. So Yitzchak said, I got to bring it out. How do I bring it out? Befiv, by dialoguing. By dialoguing. You know, when someone doesn't act the way you want them to act, or someone doesn't behave the way you want them to behave, the easiest approach is silent treatment. Silent treatment. We're not talking. Right? Clinical tests have shown that silent treatment does not solve one life problem. Right? All it does is exacerbates everything. Yitzchak knew who his son was. You know who Esav was. You think Esav fooled him? You think Esav fooled him? It's Yitzchak Avinu. He's not going to get fooled. Yitzchak knew exactly who his son was. But he chose to go ahead and engage him anyway because he saw all of the beautiful holiness that was trapped inside. And if I could just keep engaging him, right? If I could just untrap the holiness, if I could just take away the layers of teeth and find that beautiful lave, then Esav could become Al Tshuva. And by the way, was Yitzchak successful? Was he successful? Absolutely yes. You know, when Yitzchak Avinu died, the pasuk says, "Vayikberu oso Yitzchak Yaakov Esav banav." Right? Ultimately, again, when Yitzchak Avinu dies, he is buried by his sons. Esav participates in Yitzchak's burial. And Rashi HaKadosh says, "Mikan leEsav she'asa tshuva." Esav became a Baal Tshuva. And do you know what I mean about Tshuva? It wasn't a Shabbaton, right? It wasn't an inspiring kumzitz. Right? It wasn't a Farbrengen. It wasn't the discovery set. It was a father who just kept talking with him. It was a father. And by the way, I don't even know that it was matters of theology. It was just relationship. Yitzchak kept the line of communication constantly open. And somehow, some way, over time, the teeth fell away, the heart was accessed, and Esav became a Baal Tshuva. Says the Sfas Emes. The Haggadah is teaching us so many lessons in this one paragraph. First of all, how do we relate to others in whom we are profoundly disappointed in? Right? This happens with parents and children. It happens with family members. And again, a lot of times these things come to a head, especially on Pesach. Right? Because especially if you have perhaps a diverse family, which many of us have, there are people sitting at that seder who may fit a lot of the behaviors that we discussed, right, in the first two sources. What do you see when you look at them? Do you see a rasha, or do you see a trapped soul? Do you recognize sometimes that sometimes so much of the negativity only comes out because of hurt? And the negativity is often so much a result because people have been burned and mistreated and let down so many times in life. It's not about God. It's not about Judaism. It's not about theology. It's just about disappointment, just a profound life disappointment. And as a result of that, there's so many layers of teeth of negativity. And if you could just find the patience, like Yitzchak had with Esav, to dialogue, to talk, to have a relationship, slowly but surely, the teeth are knocked out. And when the 32 teeth fall out, like Rabbi Nachman says, then the lave, the heart, is revealed as well. Take enough time to get to know the rasha, and you'll discover something amazing. But the truth is, it's not just about the rasha. It's about how we relate to ourselves as well. Because as we mentioned before, right, the Arba Banim are not other people. The Arba Banim are us, right? We sometimes do this at our seder, like before we start the Arba Banim. You know, everybody pause for a second and identify. It's a dangerous term to use today, right? Which son do you identify with? How do you identify, right? Which of the Arba Banim, how do you identify? And the truth is, don't share it, because people are going to be embarrassed if they share it. But it's incredible. And if you're honest with yourself, every year, you generally end up identifying with someone else. And a lot of times in life, much to my personal, it's the Rasha. It's the Rasha for a variety of different reasons. Because you come to a Pesach, and Pesach is one of the most Nisdarim are some of the most uplifting and inspirational moments. And some of us have like that moment of like spiritual epiphany where I want to do something different. And then we come to another Pesach and I'm still the same person. I'm still living the same life and I'm still doing the same things. And I'm so profoundly disappointed in myself. And I feel a little bit like the Rasha. I feel a little bit like that person. So the Rasha is not just someone else. Sometimes the Rasha is me. So how do we look at ourselves? How do we view ourselves? What do we see when we look in the mirror? And a lot of us go through life avoiding looking in the mirror. Why? Because I really don't want to see what's looking back at me. Because if I'm honest and I take a real look, what I see is a lot of unmaterialized goals, dreams, and aspirations. A lot of us feel to ourselves, at this point in my life, I thought I would be somewhere so different. I thought I'd be doing different things. I thought I'd be accomplishing different things. I thought the things that I'm struggling with would have been long in my past, but yet I'm still contending with the same things now that I was contending with 10 years, 20 years, 30 years ago. And sometimes we look in that proverbial mirror and there's such a profound sense of disappointment because I feel like I'm the Rasha. And in that moment, right, it's a very dangerous crossroads. Because in that moment when you feel like a Rasha, right, what does the Rasha do? Right? What's the Rasha's approach in the Haggadah? What's his approach? Right? He gives up. You see, people who give up generally never say, I give up. Instead, what do they say? They make up all the reasons why they no longer have to try. Right? I'm not giving up. I'm not a quitter. I'm not a quitter. But I'm going to tell you why I don't have to do this anymore. Which means I'm actually giving up, but it's a more sophisticated way to say that I'm giving up, and I feel a little bit less guilty about explaining why I'm not going to do anymore. But that's the Rasha just gives up, because that's what Rishayim do. Because at a certain point in time, when I acknowledge that I'm not the person I want to be, I'm not living the life I want to live, I'm not doing the things I want to do, I know that I'm not actualizing my potential, it's deflating, and it's depressing. And sometimes almost like the reflexive reaction is, I give up. And that's what the Rasha does. But he gives up with sarcasm and he gives up with cynicism. But essentially, he's just the person who gives up. Rabbi Nachman writes, we've mentioned this before in the last couple of weeks, but Rabbi Nachman writes, the greatest tool of the Yetzer Hara is not sin. The greatest tool of the Yetzer Hara, Rabbi Nachman says, is yeyosh, despair, giving up. Because once you give up, giving up is like a gateway midah. Because once you give up, anything and everything, the worst averas, the least averas, everything becomes possible because I gave up. Once you give up, then ultimately again, then they says, you gave up, now it's time to party, right? Now you gave up, so that's it. Once that yeyosh sets in, so there's an existential danger with that. And that's the Rasha doing in the Haggadah. We read that, sometimes we read that Rasha, and like, we read his words and we look at it like with such disdain. The Rasha shouldn't evoke feelings of disdain. The Rasha should evoke profound feelings of sadness, because the Rasha is someone who has given up on himself. He's given up on life. And therefore, again, a lot of times if we identify as that Rasha, we may not realize it, but a lot of times, without even realizing it, we've given up on ourselves. We've given up on ourselves. Now, the truth is, I don't mean that like, I stay in bed with the covers over my head and just say, I'm not getting out of bed, I'm not doing anything. I don't mean like that, but almost like in a more nuanced way, we give up on ourselves. We stop pushing. We stop trying to constantly become better. We lose that drive. And we just settle into a spot of personalistic complacency and life mediocrity. We give up. And so comes along the Rasha, who sometimes I identify with. And what do we say to the Rasha? What do we say to ourselves? I look in the mirror, and what do I say? One simple thing. It's not me. It's just my teeth. It's not me. It's just my teeth. That's it. It's not me. It's just my teeth. The real me, without all of these teeth of negativity, is good, is pure, is holy, is special. Just over the course of life, I've acquired all of these negative rows of teeth. But if I could just find a way to like literally yank them out, if I could just find a way to like extricate them from my spiritual mouth, then I could once again get in touch with the real me. And this becomes the overarching avoda of Pesach. Pesach is all about encountering your true original self. Pesach is not about becoming someone else. It's not about evolving into someone else. Pesach is about going back to who you really are. Because at my core, see, this is the most beautiful thing about Yiddishkeit. Holiness is not something you have to acquire. Righteousness is something you have to acquire. It's in us. It's in us already. I have to discover. I don't have to acquire. I have to discover. But a lot of times what obscures the discovery are all the rows of teeth of negativity. So what does the Haggadah say? Haki Yashinav. Get rid of your teeth. Get rid of your teeth. Identify. First of all, identify what are your teeth. What are your teeth? And after you identify it, okay, because the first step is identification, then find the courage to remove it. And if I could remove those teeth, it's one by one, and yes, it's an arduous journey and a long process, but if I could remove them one by one, then I get back to who I was. That's chayiv adam liros as asmo kilu yatzem mimzram. When we left Egypt, it was a tabla rasa. It was a blank slate. When we left Egypt, again, Chazal called Egypt like a rebirth. We were ger shidisgar hikatan shnodami. Like just when a person converts, it's like they're reborn. When we left Egypt, there was a rebirth as well. Entire avoda of Yitzias Mitzrayim, of Pesach, is identifying your teeth, figuring out a way to knock them out, and returning to who and what you really are at your core. And by the way, I'll show you something amazing. What's the apex of Pesach, right? The apex of the Yom Tov of Pesach? The zenith, the high point. This is everybody's first Pesach. Okay, good. I'm happy. It's like, go to a beginner's. The high point is Kriyas Yamsuf, splitting of the sea. Remember again, everybody's a little Pesached out by the time we get to the last days, right? But on the last days of Yom Tov, right? Shvi'i Shal Pesach. Shvi'i Shal Pesach is the Sfarim bring down, is the holiest time of Pesach, right? Why? It's Kriyas Yamsuf, splitting of the sea. Because everything was about what happened at Kriyas Yamsuf. Az Yashir, the Rebbe Shalom appeared to us. We saw, whatever this means to see God, we saw God. Yamsuf was the first time that we actually took heroic spiritual action. Remember again, up until Kriyas Yamsuf, it was all about what God did for us. We did absolutely nothing. Judaism was a spectator sport. Kriyas Yamsuf was the first time we had to walk into the sea. Shvi'i Shal Pesach. So that's why everything, even, often what ends up happening on Pesach, to be honest, is, what's the problem with Pesach? We peak in the beginning, right? It's the problem, like, the seder is great, and then it's like, there are still like a lot more days left after this, right? Like, in other words, it's the problem, like, everything goes into the seder, right? There's like 73 divrei Torah every single second. For the rest of us, like, people like are just like looking at each other, just like, all right, another meal. But we don't realize, like, there's a build-up, there's a progression. Outside Pesach, you do have to pace yourself spiritually as well. There's a build-up. The starim are there to set the table. Chalamayid, you know what chalamayid is? Chalamayid is then when you take the power of the seder and you bring it back into the real world, right? Chalamayid is like a little bit like real life, not totally real life, right? I'm kind of in the world, not fully in the world. It's this beautiful spiritual laboratory to take everything you got on the first days of Pesach, bring it into the world. So now by the time I come to the last days of Pesach, I have the inspiration from the first days. I took the inspiration from the first days. I actually used it in real life on Chalamayid. Now I'm ready for Kriyas Yamsuf. Now I'm really ready to meet God. And something amazing happens. If you take a look at number 6, with this we'll conclude. If you take a look at number 6, so the pasuk in Az Yashir says, "Uberuach hapecha ne'ermu mayim," which literally means with the breath of your nostrils, the waters were heaped up. So of course, what's the imagery? The imagery is like Kiviyach, like HaKadosh Baruch Hu, like breathed on the waters, and that's how the waters split. Rabbi Sila of Rizhin, the Heilige Rizhin, says something beautiful. He says, excuse me, he says, apacha, so the straight translation is nostrils, your nose. But apacha could also mean what? Anger. So the Rizhin says what it means is, you split the sea in anger. What does that mean? Take a look at number 7. This is going to change your life. The Rizhin says as follows. He says, Ella, His bir Rabbi Somer Rishon, Shekasa vayashav hayam lifnos boker, leisano v'darshu chazal litno perish. Listen to this. Kishnivra hayam, hisna kadosh baruch hu imo, shia alav ipam l'shanos estivo, lifnos aderech l'vnei Yisrael. Listen to what this medrash says. When Hashem created the sea, He said to the sea, here's the deal, right? You're going to flow. You're going to flow this way, and Hashem created a natural order for the sea. But He said to the sea the following. There is going to be a time where Klal Yisrael is going to stand at the banks of your sea, of the Red Sea. And He commanded the sea, when Klal Yisrael comes, you need to split in front of them. This is already from creation, right? During the 6 days of creation, right? The seas are created again, in the beginning of creation. Chash Baruch Hu says, you're going to flow a certain way, but I'm telling you, in a couple of generations from now, after creation, there's going to be a nation, Klal Yisrael, they're going to stand at the banks, and when you see them, you need to split for them. Okay? So the sea says to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, no problem. He says, right, Heralium Eifo, es Nishmas Yisrael. So the sea says, okay, but how do I know? How do I know which nation? Because no problem. Shows them a picture. Right? Divine screensaver, here it is, right? Here, right? When these guys get to the banks of the Red Sea, you need to split for them. No problem. Great. A couple thousand years go by. What happens? Klal Yisrael, he goes on, Mishegia, Eleam Yisrael P'duyim. So now, fast forward, right? He says, Klal Yisrael standing by the banks of the Red Sea. They're standing there. The sea is supposed to split. This was the condition of creation. And what happens? He goes on, he says, I'm sorry, I'm skipping a little bit. Sarav hayam lihibaka lifnehem. The sea refused to split. Why? Because Baruch Hu says, we made a deal. So the sea said, no. I agreed to split in front of a righteous nation. Do you see these guys? Right? You see this Chaburah over here? Right? They're tarnished, they're broken, they're sinners, they're complainers, they're ingrates. I'm not splitting them. This is what the sea says to Chash Baruch Hu. So remember again, it was programmed with creation that when Klal Yisrael shows up at the banks of the Red Sea, that ultimately the sea is going to split. Klal Yisrael is there, the sea won't split. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, no, what's going on? The sea says, Ribono shel olam, you showed me a picture like a people out of art scroll biographies, right? And now, look at this Chaburah that's here. They don't deserve for me to split. So the Medrash says, what happened? Elo lachin hayitzarcha. So that's why uberuach hapecha. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, you're not going to split. I'll split you myself. Uberuach hapecha. The Rebbe Shalom split the sea, says the Rizhiner, with anger. The sea would not split. And ultimately, again, HaKadosh Baruch Hu splits it on his own. What's the machlokes between the Ribono Shel Olam and the sea? It's very simple machlokes. The sea saw us for who we were. HaKadosh Baruch Hu sees us for who we can become. The sea simply saw a nation filled with rows of teeth of negativity. And the Ribono Shalom is able to see us without all of our teeth. He's able to see us in our pure and pristine form. He's able to see that beneath all of the layers of spiritual schmutz, there is a beautiful neshama that is dying to come out. There is a beautiful neshama that is ready to shine forth. There is a person who wants more, who wants to do more, wants to be more. The sea only saw us for who we were. HaKadosh Baruch Hu ultimately sees us for who we are able to become. And the entire avoda of Pesach is to have this same level of divine vision. So often in life, we only see ourselves for who we are. And a lot of times, who am I? I'm a composite of all of my life failures. I'm a composite of all of my misdeeds. And I'm a collection of every single wrong decision. So I look in the mirror, I look like a Rasha, I feel like a Rasha, and there's only one thing you do if you're a Rasha, which is you give up. You give up. Whether you give up right out, or you give up through cynicism, but you just give up. And the whole avoda of Pesach is, as we relate to the Rasha, see beneath the veneer, see beneath the teeth and see the goodness. And as it applies to ourselves, yes, we all develop those teeth of negativity over the course of a lifetime. Some of us more rows than others. But it is important for us to believe with all of our heart that beneath all of those teeth, all of those rows of teeth of negativity, is a beautiful, pristine, holy, and good neshama that is ready to come out and to accomplish something incredible in this world. Unless you think that this is just a very nice idea. No, that's how HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself sees us. When Hashem looks at me, he doesn't see my mistakes. When he looks at me, he doesn't see my failures. because he looks at me toothless, right? He looks at me beneath all of those layers of impurity and mistakes, and he sees the goodness, the beauty, and the holiness that I possess. You know, Chaburah spends all day doing, like Hashem says, like I think every parent does this also. Hashem says, I just hope one day you could see yourself the way that I see you. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu looks at us, all he sees is greatness, is beauty, and holiness. And all he wants from us is that we should see ourselves the same way that he sees us. And this is the entire avoda of Pesach, is to identify our teeth, because we all have them. It's just a shaila of how many rows you have, right? Or baby teeth, adult teeth, but to all have those teeth of negativity. But to recognize, I wasn't born with them. I didn't come into this world with them, which means they can be removed. They can be extracted. To identify them, to make an extraction plan, even if I can't implement the extraction plan, but to make an extraction plan, and to believe that once I'm able to extract all of those teeth, there is a beautiful, holy, and magnificent version of me that is waiting to come out. HaKadosh Baruch Hu already sees it. And by the way, I'll tell you something amazing. How do we end the seder? How do we end the seder? You might be thinking, I have no idea. I don't make it that long, right? But again, I'll tell you how to end the seder. The end of the seder is the best. It's Shir HaShirim. The end of the seder is, at the end of every single Haggadah, is Shir HaShirim. Shir HaShirim. Now, why is Shir HaShirim there at the end of the Haggadah? So just on the most simple, Shir HaShirim is a love song between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Klal Yisrael, because you know what happens at the end? Do you know that when someone believes in you, and someone believes in you unconditionally, and someone loves you unconditionally, that is the most beautiful form of love one could ever experience. I don't need you to do anything for me. I don't need you, but to know that you have someone who believes in you more than anything. So I go through the seder, and I've identified my teeth. I pledge myself to knock out my teeth, and I know that I have a God who sees me toothless and spiritually beautiful. That I have a God who sees me not only for what I am, but for what I could become, is the best feeling in the world. And I'm in love. I'm in love with the Ribono Shel Olam, because I feel for the first time in a very long time how in love he is with me. And that's why the Seder ends with this beautiful Shir HaShirim, right? That's why the end. And again, do you have to say Shir HaShirim? Do you have to say it? You have to say it? No, it's like supplemental sections, right? You know, it's like appendix. You know, you don't have to. But how can you not? But how can you not? At the end of the day, to feel that sense of love. So we should be Zocha Miras Hashem. First of all, as we relate to others, even if we run into the Rishayim, and inevitably we do, and inevitably we will, to work on our Ahavas Yisrael, to see beneath the teeth of negativity. When we look at ourselves, even if we see a Rasha staring back, to recognize that might be the me who is right now, but that's not the real me. That's the episodic me. That's the temporary me. That's the me that's a result of all the stuff I've gone through in life. But the real me is toothless. The real me is holy. The real me is beautiful. And I want to find a way to identify the teeth, extract the teeth. Because Kadosh Baruch Hu already sees me for what I can become. I want to use this Yom Tov of Pesach to align my vision of me with the Ribono Shel Olam's vision of me. And if we could come out of Pesach, and when we look in the mirror, the me that I see is the same me that HaKadosh Baruch Hu sees. That's a successful Yom Tov. Wish everyone a Chag Kosher v'Sameach, a beautiful Yom Tov. We should be Zochem Meretz Hashem. Still plenty of time between now and Pesach, so we should be Zochem Meretz Hashem. B'Nisan Nigalu, B'Nisan Asidin Nigal. This is a month of incredible miraculous activity, national miracles, personal miracles, dramatic miracles, and every level. We should be Zochem Meretz Hashem, that it should truly be a month of miraculous activity, and Halavai, a month of Gula for us as individuals and for all of Klal Yisrael. Okay, also, if there is anyone who needs to do Mechiras Chametz, anyone who needs to do Mechiras Chametz, feel free if you have. Do you have? Oh yeah, absolutely. Great to be home for you.
Yeah.
Great. Okay.
Well, hard to